Morning, everyone. Just giving everyone a few minutes to join. Right. I think we're ready to get started. Let's go. So we want to talk about roadmaps today. I want to talk a little bit about strategy, mostly about tactics, a bit of mix of everything. That's kind of my ideal, really. So a couple of ground rules for me. Ask questions anytime you like. There's a nice Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window that you're in now. We see them pop up. We'll have time at the end to go through them, but if we don't, I'll follow up via email or something else. If you prefer, you are inspired, you're going through it, whatever the thing might be, my email address is there and everything else. There will be one poll near the start, and then we will leave you to be passive and put into the Q&A and everything else. We won't be asking for a poll every 2 minutes, anything like that. So feel free to multitask, feel free to go from there. So GH, for those who don't know, we are an Adobe Commerce and Magento open source agency. It's what we do. What we try to work with here is clients that are top of their game and want a fresh set of ideas. How do we stay ahead? How do we keep the competition far away? Or in the reverse, we work with the challengers, the people that want to go kick those people off the throne, want to make sure that they get out of the way and supplant those people. Where strategy sits in our services are important to today. So we start with the strategy, the vision. Where are we going to go? What are we going to execute? What are we going to make possible? What's the thing that really is our North Star? Then we work into the perfect user experience, the expression to the customer, the connection to the customer, and then we go and execute it in the development. This will be relevant later on when I talk about the different models and everything else, but you can see how critical we put that focus on strategy and how we make sure that we are always starting at that point. So as we get going, I will kick off a poll here. What I want to know is, what did you feel about your strategy for H1? So H1, not H2, the 6 months that just went past. Was it good? Did you have a good one in place? Did it work well? Or are you just like, you know what, Jamie, I didn't need to be reminded of that today. Like, what am I doing, etc. Because what I want to do, hopefully, by the end of this, is make you feel more confident about H2. That's my aim, right? I just want to make sure it's leveled up a little bit. If I can do that, I'll be a happy guy. I'll go on with the rest of my day with a smile on my face. So what we can see at the moment is unanimous that it was okay. So nobody's smashing it. Nobody's saying, don't talk to me about it. That's good. I don't want to turn anyone off in the middle of the webinar. 100% out. One person saying, don't talk to me, said that, yeah, they were really, they're really muttering under their breath that have asked that question. So, all right, let me finish that. It's been open. Press end, and then hopefully it's not popping out in front of you. So let me just get that over there. So we call it the art of being 2 steps ahead. We call it the ability to see in front of you, say, this is where we're going to go, and almost kind of will it into existence. But that sometimes people just expect it to be willed. They don't expect it to actually happen. So what I want to talk about is just a little bit around how we make those things happen, right? So those of you who have seen our presentations in the past know that I had a kind of survive, adapt, thrive methodology, right? So the start was just, how do we keep the lights on? How do we keep this from blowing up? How do we keep ourselves confident? We then went into, well, now we've got our bases covered. We don't feel the anxiety anymore. How do we move into adapting? And then how do we focus on just dominating, thriving, getting out there and all the rest? And it's become such a popular methodology. I'm seeing it everywhere now, which is great. We're going to take it a little bit further today. But it really feels like this year, for a lot of people, things have blown up again. Now, that could be from a going all the way back to surviving. It could be, well, we need to adapt in a whole bunch of different ways. It could be that they're getting a whole bunch of revenue, but cost of living has affected so many people in so many different ways that there's just a whole bunch of different ways to look at this, right? Now, when I look at the plans before 2020, because it feels like maybe we've had a few years of trying to catch up with the fact that we should have done planning. They look a little bit like this. We sit down every year, we come up with a number, usually from thin air, out of the sky. We say we're going to get there. We're going to do 20%, 40%, 50%, 100%. Or in some cases, we don't have a number at all. We just have a, let's go enjoy ourselves. We'll come back and hope it's going to go well. And what you can see in a pattern when you look back over the years is just this sky-high hockey stick being projected, but actually the performance is just kind of where it was going to land regardless. We're not doing anything purposeful. We're not stepping forward. And so much of this is about lack of strategy. It's about not sticking to it, not having it, but usually just the need for refinement, right? And what we're about here is about how do we drive that? How do we make sure it happens? How do we make sure that actually that this isn't just willed into existence, we're making it happen, we're putting in the effort, we're putting in the structures and everything else. So when I see people, when I see clients and retailers come to us, we typically see a lot of these kind of common issues here I've got on the screen. It's a whole bunch of ideas that nobody looks at. Usually even worse, the CEO's got a whole bunch of ideas that the department's not even aware of until we've asked them. Or customer service have a whole list of complaints over here that nobody's talked about. Usually there's no deadlines or KPIs. There's no, we need this system in by this date for this campaign. There's no drivers of what this work is going to be done for. And the big thing here is just that it's just a bit scatterbrained. It's a bit all over the place. If it's written down, we're lucky. If it is written down, sometimes it's just, you know, hey, I created these Jira tickets last month. It's not quite a strategy. So I want to show you what that looks like today. The signs of a good strategy, what we like to look to get to is a common direction. We want everybody involved. We want everybody to feel like this is their plan, their contribution to that success, their contribution to getting the company where it needs to be. We want accountability and a benchmark for success. So if we've got the number of plus 10%, that's our benchmark. We don't want 7 or 8 or 5. We want 10, right? We've got a number to aim for. But we can also ask the question, what do we do to impact that number? Right, and it's a conversation starter, it's an idea generator, all the rest of it. We're biased, of course, but whenever we speak to a great retailer, they always say we want to be an extension of the team. We want the agency to feel like they're part of ours. Well, strategy is a key part of that. Sharing ideas is a key part of that. And letting agencies in to contribute to that plan is a key part of that. So we're going to talk about that as well. And then we also want to talk about that kind of founder mentality. I think this is it's a poor term because it is, by default, it brands the founder as the only person possible to do this. But in reality, we all kind of work for a certain reason. A lot of that time, it's to make the impact. It's to leave a dent on the universe that we can call ours and to progress forward. So let me talk through how we turn that into outcomes, not just outputs, right? So we've got all these kind of messy lists, all these things that we're going to do. How do we turn it into a reality that gets us to where we want to be? So I want to walk through JH's favorite model. There's quite a few of these, so it can be varied, it can be joined up, it can be others, and I could probably do a whole webinar on 6 different models of these, but this is my favorite because it's just easy to explain. Hopefully nobody in the Q&A says that's terrible. What on earth were you thinking, Jamie? So let's see. So it's as easy as this. We start with pyramid of success. We layer it with our big goal. This is where we're going to be. We pick some objectives of where we're going to get to. We surround it with our common strategies. And then we have a whole bunch of tactics and we get it done. It's as easy as that, right? It's as easy as that. We just did it. It was 4 steps. It's a quick webinar. Everyone can have their time back. We can move on with our day, right? Yeah, I get it. I get it. It's a bit too fast. Let me give you a practical example. Let me show you where it's going. Let me show you how it layers together. So we start with that big goal. We want it to be the North Star. We want it to be something here. Usually it's revenue. Sometimes, especially in times like cost of living, this might be profit margin. It might be gross margin. It might be something that affects the bottom line, but isn't going to change the revenue itself. Like, we'll be happy if revenue stays the same, but we want to move our profit a couple of percentage points in the right direction. Here I'm saying it's going to be ambitious. I'm going to say it's 40% year-on-year increase for that H2 period, just to put it there. Things to think about with this goal is we want to be saying, is it high enough? So certain teams, leadership styles and so on, they want to aim for 40% because in reality, they want 30, they want 25. And if they can go to 40%, they've got the director title, they've got a seat on the board, they're going to be getting candlelit dinners with the CEO and the managing director in the evening. Like, they're just going to blow away every single goal. Depends what motivates your team. You have to make sure that it's sexy enough that people want it and that they'll work for it and they'll make sure they contribute, but you don't want it to be demoralizing. You don't want it to be, well, we only hit 20% when we were aiming for 40. Again, this comes into your leadership style. Is it a all or nothing and everybody's going to be absolutely devastated when it's not happened? Or are you going to lead with that positive reinforcement and say 10%, this is awesome, 20%, this is awesome, 25, it's up to you, right? But I think that your team will always deserve something positive. They always want to have something to gravitate to, and this goal matters a lot. You've got to think about where you end that goal too. So in this case, we're talking about H2, so we want to make it a H2 goal. It's not that we don't care about January onwards, of course we do, but we're breaking it down into smaller chunks so that it's more easily achievable. In some of the retailers I speak to, they're at battle stations right now. They are nothing except, we need to get this done in the next 6 months. And if we can achieve this target next year, is going to be absolutely easy. So again, war room mentality, where do you get it to and all the rest? But you want to make sure that there's celebration, there's wonderful news coming out of this, not just the data point is the data point. In the objectives, we want to surround it by 3 core aims. We can go more than this, we can go less than this, but I find 3 is a perfect number. From my perspective, this is where we're going to analyze the key opportunities. What are the things we can make the big impact with? In this case, 40% year on year, I need to pick the key numbers. You can see I've got 3 quite big ones here that I'm going to aim for, that are going to go down throughout every piece of work that I do. Yes, I might have other numbers, but I'm going to constantly say, is it worth it if these 3 numbers aren't in the right place? These 3 need to be the things that I go away and win with. So don't want to go crazy. You want to make sure they're immovable numbers. They're not flip-flopping every month as to which one do I go for, which ones don't I. You want to be consistent on this. And you want to make sure that it's going towards the objective. So when you look at the number here, all 3 of these contribute to that revenue number, and therefore they're applicable numbers. We're not going to pick 3 random ones like, you know, happiness of the team at work or something. It's not going to be in there. So we then surround it by the core strategies. So what are we going to do to move these things forward? What are we going to do to make sure that we're progressing towards impacting on these objectives in order to hit our revenue goal? What are we going to group as a key things that we move forward by? Now, I pick these 5 because they spread quite nicely. They spread from user experience. They spread from how do I acquire new users in my marketing integration, to the user experience along the buying, to the relationship we have and engagement. And then I'm also thinking about the maintenance and the operational workflows, because I want my team to be able to do more. It's H2, they need to be enabled, they need to be going more, right? What we'll do with those is we'll set a bit of a mission statement for each, so that everybody knows what they are. But again, at a glance, everybody knows my strategy without having to be walked through it for half an hour every single time they come to it. Key thing about these strategies, they have to be yours. They have to be applicable to you. There's no 5 strategies that apply every 6 months. You have to switch these up and constantly be going for something else, something new, something more, something forward, right? And you're going to focus really heavily on these strategies. There's no need for more than 5. And if ultimately this is if it's a, well, I need 6 because this is coming up, and then consider the time frame of the plan. Do you need this to be a 3-month plan rather than a 6-month plan? Have a look at what those are there. You can adjust it depending on your cadence, right? But ultimately, you've got to have that that mission statement. But if you've got a bigger team, if you're not a kind of one-person army in your organization, you can look at, well, who can own these different things? How can I use it as a development plan? How can I level up the people around me, and so on and so on. Then we come to these tactics that everybody's used to. This is typically the strategic layer most people work at. They just aren't necessarily articulating the level above, right? This is what we're going to focus on today. This is our words for ideas, for things that we should do, things that we should have in our plan and everything else. And what I want to do is spend the rest of the time on these, because ultimately you need that regular refreshment. You need to be able to use that refreshment process as your strategic advantage. When it comes to leading the market, chasing the lead, whatever the goal might be, unless you are constantly thinking of those new ideas, there's always a chance someone's going to outthink you and outwit you and be more agile and all the rest of it. We want to keep everybody on their toes, where we know our market, we know our customers, we're surrounded by people that can help us in their own disciplines like e-commerce and marketing and development and all these other things. So let's utilize that to make sure that every bit of budget, whether we have one or not, is maximized towards that plan. That's what we need to achieve, right? And ultimately, you've got to kind of take a step back and decide, where do you land on the scale? What are the things you need to leverage within these tactics? So for example, if you are on your decision-making criteria, if you're really data-led, you're kind of, I need the research, I need it to be proven. My boss might give me, they'll give me a £10 for every £50 I generate. That's the ROI they expect for every idea. Then you need to be a little more on the insight side, but you also then will need to be running user research, or need to be looking at, how do we prove the data here, and how do we implement things from case studies in terms of using that data rather than just off the cuff. From a budget perspective, we need to be more creative if there isn't a budget. But we need to be creative on either end of the scale ultimately, but in very different ways, right? So if you're low on budget, it's about how can you do things yourself? How can you utilize yourself and the people you already have to maximize systems you already have? On the blank check side, it's a bit of that too, but it's also about how do you push forward into the market. So let's talk about refreshment. So this is where I'm going to bombard you with a whole bunch of mistakes that we've seen in the market, things that people have learned from, people that have passed these over to us, things that we've seen from different clients, and so on, so that hopefully you come away with more for your H2 roadmap, more ideas, more things to implement, more things to look at day to day, right? Now, number one thing here is sometimes, when I talk about that strategy of like, we go in every year, we say we're going to the moon, and then we go in next year and say we're going to the moon. You got to start with, well, where am I going? What do I need to be able to evolve from? What do I need to enable? What am I going to achieve? You don't need to be hiding from the reasons it didn't happen last year. You need to be addressing them, looking them straight in the face and saying, either, hey, you team member, you weren't doing it, or hey, I didn't enable them as manager, I didn't get them there, I didn't take them to this journey, or I wasn't given enough budgets. That you've got to start with, what are the enablers, right? Fight your corner, make sure that people know how to enable your team. Next thing you're going to look at is, from a tactical perspective, when I talk about those 5 strategies, you don't want to make sure it's all just in one bucket. It's really, really easy sometimes when we talk about retailers that are coming to us and asking for our help. It's really common for to say everything in the conversion rate optimization bucket, or our checkout's terrible. If we just improve the checkout, we'll get double our revenue tomorrow. Those might be true, but equally, we want to make sure we're maximizing the budget. So we want to say, well, if we could only spend 20% of our budget over here on this strategy, how would we spend it? How would we maximize that? Is redoing the whole checkout a good thing? Or do we need to consider a couple of tweaks over here and kind of spread our budget across multiple things? You have to allow for those marginal gains where you're breaking, say, a 10-point plan down into each individual point and say, well, would it be smarter if I just did it one by one rather than everything? Constantly filter those tactics. Equally, you've got to look at things like your cadence of your meetings, your reports, your roadmaps, the things that you get internally here. So If you're not getting a report from other parts of the business, what's happening in the warehouse, customer service, customer support, from the board, you need to get those things feeding in as idea centers for you so that you can help get ahead. We worked with a brand once where they'd not spoken to their customer support team. They'd been there for 3 years, this core contact who brought us in. We sat them down for a day. We questioned the 7 people in that team, really, really big team. And they all unanimously said the biggest complaint we have is nobody knows when their order is going to be shipped. Is it shipped? Is it going to be arriving? Is it there tomorrow? That was a fix that took less than a day for their website. And all it took was just that little, hey, could you send me a report from now on of the top issues you've had that month, that week, that fortnight? I'll make sure it's in my roadmap and we can have a better customer experience. Sometimes it's not the things that are straight out of your head. It's about gathering as much insight as we can. I said it earlier, but we want to make sure the team's on board. We want to make sure that we're sharing often and we're not keeping things to ourselves. It's really easy, especially in times where it's tough and revenue might be down, to just kind of make sure everybody's okay and that they're not anxious and they're not stressed. In reality, what people are most stressed about is the inability or the lack of opportunity to help. They want to dive in. There's a reason they work with you, for you, etc. They want to be able to help. So you want to share as much as you can, invest that time into the team and look at the opportunities for how do we level these people up? How do we make sure that they have the career progression that they deserve as well? When you're talking in those regular meetings, you want to make sure you're talking about the strategy, not just what's their day to day. Really easy to say, hey, yesterday this thing broke. Oh, did you fix it? Oh yeah, I spoke to Nick. It was solved in 15 minutes. That's fine. But if you make sure there's an agenda here to separate these things out and just benchmark, hey, our strategy for this 30 days was here. We are 10 days in. Are we going to hit it well, or do we need to adjust? Where do we need to move these things around? Every single time you need to say, is it enough? Is it enough to get me to the number? Is it enough to get me to the goal? Do we look like we're on track for 20% up on conversion rate, for example? It's the feedback to that data, combine it with a gut feel. Am I feeling good about this, positive about this or not? And create a culture where you are embracing your mistakes. It is one of the things I see so often is I'll speak to the CEO or the MD or the boss's boss, and they'll say, oh, that person, they're terrible. They just constantly make this thing happen and that thing happen. I wish I could just give them a list and they get it done. And in reality, if we were all just open with each other and said, hey, you did this, but this is how we're going to achieve this together next time. Sometimes, yes, it's the people problem. It can't be solved. A lot of the time it can, with just a culture of honesty and everything else. When you're talking about external agencies, external contractors, whoever else it might be, holding them to account gets you a better result. And often this kind of bottles up and it bottles up and it bottles up. You switch your agency, and in reality, you're giving all those things you wish you could have given to your current agency to the next one. Don't get me wrong, sometimes you hit a ceiling. A lot of the time you do. That's the kind of people that come to us typically is, I'm not quite getting the service I should. I now want to come over to JH, but a lot of the time, they're just the small things of, I wish you'd have got back to me that by Wednesday rather than Friday, is a process change. It's just learning from those and making the small tweaks. You want to talk about seasonality. You want to talk about what are the goals coming up that are going to drive some of these tactics? What are the things that are pressing deadlines for us to be ready for? Does it fit us to leverage these things? Are we just forcing them in the calendar because it's what some article over here told us to do? Or is it truly a difference in our customers' lives? Is this the moment for them? Is this the moment we line up straight away? Then you also need to just look at that sale mentality in the first place. I've seen brands ruined by just endless sales after sales after sales, and all of a sudden they're discount brands before they knew it, because they put on 6 months continually of different sales without much of a plan other than, well, as long as I get the money in, I'm fine. And then they have to spend years on doing that to get to a point where they're getting their value back and they're getting their profit margins back. Or they end up putting their prices up just so they can discount them to achieve that additional margin in the first place. So you really have to just analyze your overall sales, your discounting, your promotional activities. Really great version of this. We used to have a client that would do their sale in the first week of every month. They would call it the real deal. week, right? This month's real deal are these things. And they would have, say, 20, 30, a very set amount every month that would happen in that first week. They would publish it all over their stores. They'd send out an email. But because they trained their customers that the first week of the month was that sale, some of them would wait for that. They would come in, and then what they would do is that they would see all of those sales happen for the first week and know what the remaining number is for the following 3 weeks of the month to achieve their target. So for them, it works as a double. It was we're making sales part of our brand, but we're only going to do 20, 30 products. We're not going to do everything. Nothing else is discounted, only the stuff that we can work with certain manufacturers with, etc., to get a good price. They got the big thing in that first week, and then for the rest of the month, they just knew what they had to make up. They knew what the rest of their sales were, and so on. And in quite a lot of the time, because they got better at picking the products, learning which ones worked, all the rest of it, they were hitting their target in that first 7 days and then surpassing it in the 3 weeks afterwards, because they just got better and better and better at that specific process. When you talk about your agency, you want to talk about what's the gut feeling of their contribution to your success. Are they making us better? Are they making us worse? Are they just kind of, anybody could do this for us? You want to, again, repeat those lessons with them. You want to ask yourself, when was the last time they took me out for a nice romantic candlelit dinner? When's the last time I heard that jazz band in the corner and, they looked across the room and just told me how much they appreciate me? Like, when's the last time they gave you that love, right? Particularly important here is, what are their ideas for the success? If you come to your agency and say, I'm going to go 40% up year on year for the rest of this year in H2, how would I do that? And just shut up there with no additional context, you'll quickly learn how smart your agency is. And when you're doing this to test them, you're really, again, going back to that gut feel of, am I with the right partner in life here? Are these people going to take me where I need to in H2? And ultimately, these days, easier to swap agency than it is to fix them a lot of the time if that gut feels a bad one. Would say, pay them for the work, pay them for the ideas, don't just expect them to go away for 2 weeks and put a massive amount of effort in. Do pay them money for these things. We want to review the systems you already have. A lot of the time, we have systems that have been in place for 4, 5, 6 years, and we hear from a retailer, hey, we want to replace this email system. Our current one, it's terrible. It doesn't do any of the things we want it to do. We take a look for half an hour, or we know that system off by heart usually. And we'll say, well, that's because you installed it 5 years ago and you've not actually kept up to date. You've not rolled out the new features. There's a whole bunch of stuff here we could train you on. The statistic I've seen repeated from most major third-party software outside of payment gateways is that about 10 to 30% is the typical usage of features they see in their systems. Because as people go throughout that relationship over time, they're just not reading the newsletters. They're not reading the new features. The new features don't get enabled overnight, on behalf of that customer. The retailer has to go in and enable it themselves. So do you have a regular call set up? Is it worth just spending a day a quarter, half a day a quarter, and just saying, you know what, I'm going to have back-to-back half-an-hour calls with these technology partners, and they're going to come to me with how they can improve this for me? If you don't have time for that, again, ask your agency. They should know these things. They work with these systems all the time. If they don't, then ask them which one they prefer. Ask them which one their preferred partner might be, right? So you're looking at, what can we activate for free? We're paying the license already. We're paying whatever the fee is. What's already in my account? These patches and things that I'm having to kind of do to keep the system up to date, what features were included in those? Because there's a heck of a lot under the hood usually that goes missed for what might be a security patch or different kind of integration. And usually it's just, you might be come to with a, hey, you've got to pay $4,000 for this, $10,000 for this, whatever it might be. Really start to understand what's under the hood. What opportunities does this allow us to have? Should be a nice, consistent question for every piece of work, just in case it comes with those free ideas, right? So you're paying 4,000, 10,000, whatever the number is. What you want to do is say, well, whilst I'm in here, what's another piece from my tactics underneath the same strategy I can do at the same time and hopefully get more for my money? So instead of something being 5 days and 3 days, how do I achieve it in 6 or 7? so that I'm just maximizing each opportunity that I have when I come to making the site different. Talk about training. When's the last time we refreshed it? We all ignore the newsletters. We all ignore the customer success managers that come from these tech partners that sometimes don't offer that much value. But it's really easy to say, here's the 5 things I need to know from you. Tell me what's new, tell me the training, tell me next time there's a dinner, whatever the things you've learned from over the years these tech partners need to give you, just be honest, be upfront. They'll make sure they're giving them you. When we talk about being data-led, you want to make sure that you're gaining the opportunities via research. So what are you doing to surface things up? Are you doing conversion rate optimization with those smaller tactics? Are you learning something in a day instead of before spending 10 days? Did you know it will work? You're looking at the analytics, the research, the partners. How can you bring all this stuff in? On the customer side, we spoke about customer success earlier and just getting a check-in with them. But there's so many different areas here that you could just chip in on, again, once a month, once a quarter. It doesn't have to be every day by any means. But when you're doing things like, say, post-checkout surveys or reading your reviews, just on the off chance that you might want to catch up with a few, all comes back to ideas of how do we get there better? How do we enable the thing we forgot to enable, all the rest of it? So what about competitors? Like, for me, I think that everybody gets into business to be unique. Everybody gets into business to be the difference they want to be in the world, their segment, the industry, whatever else it might be. So I don't tend to put a lot of time into competitors. I think there are automated tools you can use to monitor how often they change their website, their pages, check their emails so you don't have to subscribe to them, but equally go back to last year and say, what email did they send last June at this time, just for that inspiration. But you don't want to obsess over them. To be that kind of the king of the hill, so to speak, you're not typically looking across at 5 other people that are king of that hill. You're looking at your kingdom, being proud of it, saying, how do I improve that? Importantly, from a mentality perspective, you want to have fun. You want to surround yourself with people that like to have fun. You don't want that kind of, again, it doesn't matter if it's dread or if it's negative numbers. How do we all keep that high energy, high spirits moving is a really key point in all of this. So that's me for today. I'm going to talk through the questions in a minute. I can see there's a few that have come in. Obviously, there's time for more if you want to submit them. Coming up from us, we have plenty in the backlog here, from frictionless checkout on next week to we have top tips for e-commerce in H2 white paper, and in conversation with, where we delve into retailers, what makes them tick and their complex problems behind the scenes, and so much more coming up in July next month as well, including Meet Magenta UK on July 18th. So the conference for Magento open source and Adobe Commerce in the UK. So I look forward to hearing from you. And of course, you'll get a couple of emails from me with bonus exercises for idea generation that you can try by yourself and generate what you're good at, what you need to improve on, everything else. So let me look over at the Q&A. Have a look. Okay. So how often should I involve my agency in strategy discussions? It's a great point. It depends on your agency. It depends on your strategy. I suppose for me, I like to have a regular meeting in the diary, even if it's just informing the agency of what's happening. If you want them to give you something back, you can either say, well, I don't need you to prepare, but I'd like you to have your wits about you. You can send it ahead of time to say, I know it doesn't make any sense in full context. I'm going to walk that through, but here's something to read. Or you can just say, you know what, why don't we go get that lunch together, and in the afternoon we'll go back and go through the strategy. It depends on your kind of people, if that makes sense. Tends to be that if you're a hustler, hard worker, endless grind, etc., you put your agency in place that's like that. If you're a thinker, you might put more executor on the other side. It tends to be a pairing of either your weaknesses are filled by that agency, or they match your strengths, so you can both go at it and both push forward and both get going with it and all the rest. What should I include in my competitor research? Oof, good question. I think this is one where, from an industry perspective, it depends on what your core channels are. So for example, certain retailers we work with, their email marketing, you can see the sky high mountain as soon as their email goes out every week or every fortnight, whenever it might be. So they put a lot of focus into, well, what are my top 10, 20 competitors? What are their emails? Okay, get me a service that summarizes these emails, say every Friday that's gone out, so I can see what the trends are. But then equally, what they'll typically will have them do is go out to, say, 10 people that just inspire them. What are brands that they aspire to be like, that they want to take some of that energy and take some of that difference into their own industry and apply that to? And again, we'll look at taking the email channel as an example. We'll look at how much there's patterns, what the differences are, and all the rest of it. Sometimes what people can do is they can look to an industry they're inspired by, take just some of that essence, some of that energy, that positioning over to their own industry and utterly dominate because they're not thinking like their competitors. So when I say it depends, it's often around, well, we do a lot of competitor reviews, and what we'll typically do is say, here's the good points and here's their weak points, and here's where you can stand out, and here's where we would suggest looking. And a lot of that is about, where's the uniqueness? If you were doing anything perfect today, what would it be? Where do you want to be in terms of the future? Someone just said, can you do that for me if I'm not a client? Yes, we can. How much say should my agency have in our strategy? I would say however much you like. Some people are master strategists and they don't need the help and the input. What they need is, what order do I execute this in? How do I bunch this together? How do I maximize my budget here? I've got 100 things, but budget for 80. Is there a way I can get 90? Like, how can I do this, right? That's their intent with their agency. And it's the same kind of strategic thinking, but it's not around the creation of the strategy itself. Others, what they need is, they need someone to bounce off. They need I've got a whole jumble of ideas, like, help me, Jamie, just kind of unjumble this thing. Other people, they might just need a therapist. They might just need a bit of, this is stressful, we are down on sales, can I just ramble at you a little bit? Don't expect you to have ideas, but if you do, that'll help me out. And I think that you've got to analyze the relationship with the agency in terms of what they should do for you. And I'm biased, but my view is that every agency's job is to elevate the people they work with. It's to get them closer to their goals. It's to make them a happier person. They feel like they're calmer as a result of having that agency around. But it's also that agency is able to predict the next move in a way. If you go, I was just thinking about this thing, you're like, I just saw the email too. And I know what you mean, because I was thinking X, Y, and Z as well. It should be a meeting of the brains. It should be a relationship where you are finishing each of the sentences because you're of the same mindset towards where you need to be. A lot of that comes from having an agency that can just pay the attention. Why 3 KPIs? So I call them objectives, you're calling them KPIs, but ultimately it's to keep focus. You can measure 20 over here if you want to, and a couple of our retailers, they'll have super big dashboards. They'll have a separate screen over here that looks like they're trading stock and it's flashing up and down live. They do, you do you in that sense, but 3 things are the ones that we want to make sure that as many of our tactics and underneath those strategies are impacting, so that ultimately we are doing the right thing. We're prioritizing the right stuff in order to get us towards our goal. Because if we're not prioritizing to get us towards our goal, we're just firing in any direction, and we're going back in 6 months later, a year later, and going, it turns out it didn't work, just turning up every week and working out what we're going to do on the Monday. Like, we've got to have that plan. We've got to make sure that there's some kind of planned steps together. Hopefully that makes sense. Looks like I'm out of questions. Let me go all the way back to the start. My email is jamie@wearejh.com. So if you want to carry on the conversation, you want to say hello, you want to say, let me pick your brains, I need a therapist for a little bit, let me know. I'm here for you. I want to make sure I'm helping, and hopefully that gives you a more positive outlook for H2, better strategy, and hopefully some more ideas on your list. But from me, have a lovely day. See you another time. Bye, everybody.